It made me want to tear my hair out and eat it. Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode. And today I'm going to show you the Fujifilm X100S. But before I do that, I would like to take a moment to thank our patrons, those people over on Patreon who support this channel and make what this channel does possible. So if you like the content on this channel, please do consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Zenography. So the X100S, well, in many ways this is one of the nicest cameras I've ever used. It's light, it's portable, it's small, it's beautifully made, and it's very nice looking as well. But in other ways, it made me want to tear my hair out and eat it. If you're an X100 shooter or an X100S or T or any of the other variants, I'd be very interested to hear what you think of these cameras, what your opinion of them is. Please let me know in the comments box below. So what this is then is it's a camera with a fixed 23mm lens, and that has a full frame equivalent of 35mm, so it's like shooting a 35mm full frame lens. That lens can't be changed, it's fixed. So in many ways this is a bit like an old consumer rangefinder, like this one, the Yashica Electro 35 that we looked at last week, a fixed lens rangefinder. But it's not a rangefinder, although it looks like one. What it is a modern autofocus digital mirrorless camera. So it's more like, I guess, a high-end point and shoot, like this Nikon L35 AF, autofocus, auto everything. That also has a fixed 35mm lens. That's my favourite point and shoot, by the way. It's a lovely camera. The Fujifilm has an APS-C sensor, and it's probably my favourite sensor of all. It is almost certainly the nicest sensor I've ever shot. It's the 16 megapixel X-Trans 1 sensor. That's the same one that's in the X Pro one and in the XE one. And this sensor, it has a very special quality. It has a porcelain-like smoothness in its images. It has an X quality that's very, very difficult to put your finger on, but it is, I think, almost certainly the nicest sensor I've ever shot. So that's good. It's a beautiful looking thing. As you can see, the designers have really gone to town on this camera, and I really appreciate that. It's been very, very thoughtfully designed, and it's clearly designed for photographers and those who really appreciate a beautiful camera. The top plate is just lovely to feel. The finish is equal to any Leica that I've used. It's very simple. What have we got? We've got exposure compensation. We've got the shutter button and power switch. We've got the shutter speed selector. We've got a hot shoe here. The aperture and focus rings are on the lens, so that's a nice touch. You can change aperture just like you could on the old film cameras with this one. And there's a focus ring there, though. That is a fly-by-wire focus ring, and it's a bit awkward to locate because of these thingies, these protrusions for the aperture control. So, but you know, generally I think that's rather a nice touch. So this is clearly designed to reproduce the look and the feel of shooting on a film camera as far as is possible on a digital camera, and it does that really, really well. Maybe a bit too well, but more on that later on. Right, here's what I like about this camera. I love its small size and portability. This is a camera you can really take anywhere with you. It's light, it's small, you can carry it around all day and absolutely not feel the strain. In fact, I'll go further than that. You can carry it around all day and actually enjoy having it with you, because it really isn't a burden. It's not like hulking around a larger camera with a heavy lens on it. And there are times when I think to myself, under those circumstances, gosh, this really is a bit of a burden. No such problem with this camera. It's a joy to take around, and it's wonderful to actually have along with you. It's very, very inconspicuous also if you're doing a bit of street photography. This camera has a very quiet shutter. It's a non-threatening camera in its appearance. It does look like an older camera. It does become a bit of a conversation starter. It's provokes friendly reactions rather than any other kinds of reactions, and it certainly doesn't provoke a hostile reaction. This is a very nice, very friendly camera, and people are not intimidated by it. Very inconspicuous and quiet to shoot. A bit like a 30s Leica, actually, like my beloved 1932 Barnack Leica. Very similar in that respect. I love the image quality. It makes stunning, superb images like those from no other sensor. And they're unlike images from any other camera I've used also. They're said to have a film-like quality, and they kind of do, I guess. But that aside, this sensor in its own right is stunning, whether the images are film-like, whether they're not, whether they're any other number of things you could care to say. Aside from all that, they are stunning images. Now, as I've said, it has the same sensor as in the X Pro one and the XE one. And I'm not sure any of the Fuji sensors have been quite as good since. It's the X-Trans 1 sensor. And I think it's been a story of increasing abilities, no doubt, increasing ability to cook film recipes and all manner of other things, and no doubt technical gains as well. But I think every time there's been a slight decrease in, what can I say, magic. The X-Trans 3, that is the sensor in the X-T1 and the XE2 cameras, that comes very, very close, and that can give this sensor a run for its money, but I don't think it quite has that same quality, that same beautiful quality that this sensor has. I like the optical viewfinder / electronic viewfinder. This camera has the double viewfinder built in that I think a couple of the other Fuji cameras have. So there's a little switch here, and if you flick it, just a touch is all it takes. It will change the viewfinder from optical to electronic, or from electronic to optical. This camera has an entirely optical viewfinder system built in, plus an entirely electronic viewfinder system built in as well, and you can choose between the two. The optical one, I think, is a nod to the cameras of old, cameras like this one or this one. So it's kind of harking back to that time of a few years ago when many cameras did have just optical viewfinders, some kind of focusing aid within those viewfinders, usually, like the rangefinders have. But yeah, just an plain optical glass viewfinder, and this one has that, and I think it's really nice. I didn't like it on the X Pro 1, but that was because I was shooting with vintage lenses. I wanted to see how the camera would perform with vintage lenses, and of course there isn't any real use for that optical viewfinder if you're using vintage lenses on the X Pro 1, because you've no means of focusing, you've no way of knowing what you're focused on. And of course with this camera, this has an autofocus lens constantly attached, so there's no problems with that. This one's only autofocus, so it's much more usable, and I really did kind of warm to it in this camera, at least rather more than I did in the X Pro 1. I do have a gripe about it, but I'll come to that shortly. It's got frame lines in it. I love the frame lines that it's got. So you get the viewfinder, and then within that, the frame lines of the actual shot. So there's quite a bit of edge, quite a bit of top and bottom that isn't covered by those frame lines, and you can see what's coming into your shot. You can see how a shot might be evolving, might be about to happen while you've got your the camera to your eye, and that's a really good feature. It's got exposure information in it, so you can see how you're exposed, so it makes a really nice shooting experience, except for one thing, and that is you don't know what you're focused on. If you're using that optical viewfinder, there's no way of confirming what you're focused on. You don't know if you're focused on an object near to you. You don't know if you're focused on an object far away from you or in the middle distance. So you're flying blind, which I've got to say is a bit rubbish, because yeah, the rangefinder's had an optical viewfinder, but you have a focus confirmation in that. You've got the focus confirmation, you've got the focusing patch in that. This point and shoot, this is quite a high-end point and shoot, and many don't have this, but it does have a little needle to show you the rough distance of what you're focused on, so you do know pretty much what you're focused on. With an SLR, of course, you have that central spot and you can tell exactly what you're focused on. So this viewfinder, the optical one, is, in the final analysis, it's not like a rangefinder, it's not like an SLR, it's not like a high-end point and shoot, because there's no focus confirmation, and in that respect, shall I say it? I'm going to say it. In that respect, it's more like a cheap point and shoot that we used to use in the 80s or the 90s, where you just couldn't tell what you were focused on, and maybe a shot would come out and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe that's the idea, to build in a little unpredictability, but I didn't like that one element of this optical viewfinder. I think you need focus confirmation. So for that reason, I mostly used the electronic viewfinder. I love the f2 lens on this camera. It's got a beautiful Fujifilm 23mm, that's the on full frame the equivalent of 35mm f2 lens. So a nice wide aperture. It's good for low light. It works great when the light's fading and you need those couple of extra stops to get that bit more light to get you shot. And that wide aperture is good for making blur if you're close to your subject. And the blur quality is nice, although I've got to say it's nothing to write home about. I did expect nicer blur from this very modern, very technical, up to the minute lens. I've used a lot of vintage lenses, and most of those have one or two harsh spots somewhere, and they're not always ultra smooth in their background blur. Modern lenses tend to be more smooth, and I had hoped this one would be a bit more smooth than it is. Having said that, it's nice enough. This lens does wash out easily in the light. If you've got sunlight coming into your shot, pretty much anywhere in your shot, you can easily catch it by you know, just turning your camera in the wrong way, and it will totally wash out your shot. So it's very prone to being attacked by sunlight, and you can lose your shot that way. And there's not always enough chance to you know, to process that shot and to get it back through processing. So I did lose 1 or 2 shots just through the shot washing out, because the lens is so prone to being hit by direct sunlight. So really you should use this with a hood. It does need a hood. That's a shame because it adds to the size, but there we are. That's what it needs. I love the fact that this is an autofocus lens. It makes everything so easy. I do like a little bit of autofocus from time to time. I enjoy manual focus. I enjoy using rangefinders and the old lenses, the vintage lenses on mirrorless and film. But it's so nice to have that extra layer of complexity, that extra layer, that extra thing to think about rather, removed, and just go about the business of creating a shot and being a photographer. So this lens is great for that. Very glad it's an autofocus lens. I love the built-in neutral density filter on this camera. If the light is too bright, just activate the neutral density filter and you can shoot at the widest possible aperture, and you can configure the function button on top of the camera to operate it, and that's what I've got this one configured to. It makes it really easy. If there's too much light, push the button, bang, the ND filter comes in. You can continue shooting as if nothing had happened. Very, very handy and a very nice feature. Here are the things that I didn't like about this camera, and there are 1 or 2, I've got to admit. The autofocus is slow, really slow. I don't know, maybe it's even as slow as this Nikon L35AF, which isn't particularly slow for a film point and shoot, but isn't particularly quick in the final analysis either. But whatever, the autofocus on this one, the Fujifilm, really is pretty slow, and it often misses. I did get a number of shots where on other cameras I would have got the shot, it would have known what I wanted to see by some strange camera telepathic thing, and it would have got the shot 9 times out of 10. 5 times out of 10, this one missed it. Especially if I was shooting on something close, you know, trying to get a close shot of something, or if the backgrounds were busy, if there was a lot going on in the backgrounds, if there was something moving, trying to focus on a moving image. It's just not as good as other autofocus systems, and that is especially important if you're using that optical viewfinder, because you're just not going to know whether you've focused on something or not. And with this camera, there is a reasonable chance that you won't have focused on what you wanted to shoot. So autofocus is not fantastic. Second thing I didn't like, and this might be me being completely dumb, please do let me know in the comments box if you know a way around this, but I couldn't assign any buttons on this camera. All I could do is assign the function button to one of a number of things. ISO, white balance, neutral density filter, which I've got it on at the moment. But the other buttons, the buttons on the back of the camera, all of these other ones on the back, I couldn't assign them to anything else other than what Mr. Fuji tells me I've got to have them assigned to. I pressed the display back button, I kept it pressed, but that operates the silent feature, switches the silent feature on and off. I think it's a case of mother knows best. Mr. Fuji has set the settings and that's what they're going to be. But if I'm being super dumb about this and you know a way to assign these buttons, do let me know in the comments box below, please. But the thing that I really didn't like on this camera, my headline didn't like issue with the X100S, is the exposure issue. This was the thing that made me want to tear my hair out. And if you've used one of these cameras, you might know what I'm talking about. I like to shoot fully open if I can. That's my preferred method of shooting. I don't always do it. It's not right for every occasion, but where I can, I like to shoot fully open. And one of the luxuries of digital cameras, one of the benefits of the technology, is that you can shoot at pretty much any aperture you want. The shutter speeds of these modern cameras are generally high enough to permit that. And they are on this camera too, but in auto exposure mode, it won't let you use them. That's right, in aperture priority auto exposure mode, you can't use over 1/1000th of a second in this camera. So there will be many occasions when you want to shoot fully open and you just can't, because the camera will only allow you to go to 1/1000th of a second, despite the fact that the camera goes up to 1/4000th of a second. The only way to do it is to use the camera fully manually, and most of the time that's just too much trouble. I mean, why have a fancy auto exposure camera with all the tech and all the electronics of the 21st century and then make it not possible to use? It just doesn't make sense to me. The official Fuji explanation is that the aperture and the shutter, because this has a leaf shutter and the aperture and the shutter work in conjunction in this lens, so Fuji say the aperture and the shutter can't be timed to work together properly at f2 over 1/1000th of a second. Now, there might be some truth in that, but it works fine in manual mode. You can shoot in manual mode at f2 and at any shutter speed you like. So is that explanation true? Well, you tell me. Doesn't quite have the ring of truth to me. So if you want to use auto exposure, you can't go over 1/1000th of a second. You can bring in the neutral density filter if the light's too bright, but still, even using that, you still can't go over 1/1000th of a second. So I've got to be honest, to me it feels like the camera has been nobbled. You're forced to shoot at certain aperture values. Is that done to make it feel like a film camera? Well, maybe so, but it's not a film camera. If you want to work within those constraints as a photographer, that's fine, no problem. But why force us to do it? It just doesn't make sense to me. If this camera is pretending that much to be a film camera, to be honest, I'd rather just shoot a film camera. At least the constraints are real. This feels like another case of Mother or Fujifilm knows best. I said this was a real photographer's camera, and it is, but it forces you to shoot as a particular kind of photographer. Flexibility is not built in, it's actually built out. But having said that, I can't help liking this camera. It's just so lovely. It's likeable, it's small, it's portable. It reminds me of an old Leica. You can take it around with you all day long. It's like having an old friend along with you. So I do like it, but given the choice between this and an XE1, or even better, an XE2, I'd take the XE cameras all day long. For me, they're just a better camera. But please do note, these are my personal opinions only. I know loads of people love these cameras, so if you're an X100 or S or T or X shooter who loves these cams, please let me know why in the comments box below. And if you've tried one but you don't get on with it, again, let me know that as well. So that's my take on the Fuji X100. For me, it's a beautiful camera that's a little bit flawed, but what the heck. I enjoyed using it, and it's been very interesting to see how these cameras work, because I'd never used one before. So there we are. So that's it from me for this week. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help the channel grow and develop, you'd like to support it, you can do that over at patreon.com/Zenography. And my continuing and heartfelt thanks to people who are currently patrons and who make this channel possible. This channel could not do what it does without the support of those patrons. So many thanks to you, to old patrons, to new patrons, to everybody. You make this possible, so thank you. So I do hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for some more Zenography. Thanks for watching.